Picture this: the deep chill of winter settling across medieval Europe, the days growing shorter, the nights longer and darker. In the midst of this cold and quiet season, something remarkable begins to unfold. Towns and villages come alive with feasts, music, and light. Families gather, gifts are exchanged, and for a brief time, the harshness of winter seems to melt away in a shared spirit of joy. But what if these celebrations, the very roots of the holidays we know and love today, were never quite as innocent as they appeared? What if, behind the merriment and tradition, lay a carefully orchestrated play for power? In the shadows of these festive fires, medieval rulers saw more than just seasonal custom, they saw opportunity. During times of political upheaval, when thrones were vulnerable and loyalties could shift like the winter winds, these midwinter festivals became the perfect disguise for dramatic power transitions. Imagine a king's coronation timed to coincide with the solstice, or a church decree quietly introduced during the 12 nights of celebration while people were feasting, singing, and lost in the magic of the moment. The very structures of authority were being rewritten. This was no accident. It was strategy, theater, and psychological manipulation woven into the fabric of what felt like tradition. In this video, we're going to pull back the curtain on these winter festivals, from the Roman Saturnalia to Norse Yule, from royal Christmas courts to Twelfth night spectacles, and uncover how they were used to mask, legitimize, and solidify some of history's most consequential shifts in power. We'll explore how pagan rituals were reshaped into Christian narratives, how feasts became displays of dominance, and how something as simple as a gift or a song could carry a hidden political message. By the end, you'll never look at holiday traditions the same way again. You'll see the subtle hand of authority in the decorations, sense the whispers of propaganda in the carols, and understand that sometimes the greatest power moves happen not in battle or council, but in celebration. Long before Christmas trees or carols entered the cultural imagination, ancient peoples across Europe were already marking the darkest days of winter with profound and powerful ceremonies. For these early societies, the winter solstice wasn't just a celestial event. It was a moment of deep spiritual significance, a turning point where the weakening sun began its gradual return, promising renewed life and hope. Each culture developed its own distinctive traditions to honor this seasonal shift, creating a rich tapestry of rituals that medieval rulers would later exploit for political purposes. Among the Germanic tribes, the festival of Yule stretched across several weeks, centered around feasting, storytelling, and sacrifices to the god Odin, who was believed to lead a spectral wild hunt across the winter skies. Communities would gather around massive bonfires, burning a specially selected Yule log to symbolize light's triumph over darkness, while sharing hearty meals from livestock slaughtered before winter scarcity set in. These gatherings reinforced social bonds during the most challenging season, creating a sense of collective resilience that leaders could later channel toward political unity. Meanwhile, the Celtic peoples celebrated Alban Arthuan, or Light of Winter, with Druid-led ceremonies at stone circles like Stonehenge, where the alignment with the solstice sunrise demonstrated sophisticated astronomical understanding. This festival emphasized the rebirth of the sun god and the gradual return of fertility to the land, blending spiritual reverence with practical preparations for the coming agricultural year. The Celts' deep connection to seasonal cycles created cultural patterns that would prove remarkably adaptable to new religious and political systems. Perhaps the most influential of these ancient celebrations was Rome's Saturnalia, a week-long December festival honoring Saturn, the god of agriculture and time. During this period, social norms were dramatically inverted. Slaves could dine with their masters, businesses and schools closed, and gambling was permitted in public. People exchanged small gifts like candles and figurines, decorated their homes with greenery, and crowned a king of Saturnalia, who could issue ridiculous commands that participants had to obey. This temporary suspension of hierarchy provided psychological release from rigid social structures, while paradoxically reinforcing the established order through controlled rebellion. What made these diverse winter celebrations so politically valuable to later rulers was their universal focus on light, renewal, and community during nature's most vulnerable period. The emotional intensity of these festivals, the combination of darkness outside and warmth inside, fear of scarcity and celebration of abundance, created perfect conditions for introducing new narratives. When societies underwent political or religious transitions, shrewd leaders recognized they could graft new meanings onto these existing traditions, maintaining the comforting surface of familiar rituals while gradually shifting their underlying significance. The very darkness that made winter frightening also made populations more receptive to messages of hope and stability, allowing authorities to present political changes as natural extensions of seasonal renewal rather than disruptive impositions of power. Medieval rulers possessed a keen understanding of human psychology and social dynamics, recognizing that the heightened emotions and altered routines of winter festivals created a unique window for implementing political change. During these periods of celebration, populations were naturally distracted by feasts, rituals, and temporary freedoms from ordinary constraints. This collective distraction provided the perfect cover for introducing significant power shifts that might otherwise have met with suspicion or resistance. The very atmosphere of renewal and possibility that characterized solstice celebrations made people more receptive to new beginnings in their political landscape as well. The temporary suspension of normal social hierarchies during festivals like Saturnalia created particularly fertile ground for establishing permanent new power structures. When everyday rules were already relaxed and roles were momentarily inverted, introducing lasting changes to the political order felt less jarring and disruptive. A coronation scheduled during the winter festivities could be presented not as a stark takeover, but as a natural part of the seasonal transformation. The emotional resonance of light returning after darkness provided powerful metaphorical support for promising better governance under new leadership, making populations more willing to accept transitions they might otherwise question. Historical records reveal numerous examples of this strategic timing in action. Coronations were frequently scheduled to coincide with Christmas or Epiphany celebrations, weaving the political transition into the fabric of religious and cultural observance. The year 974 saw the coronation of Otto III in Rome on Christmas Day, a deliberate choice that framed his imperial authority within the context of Christ's kingship. Similarly, treaty signings and diplomatic agreements were often finalized during winter festivities, using the spirit of goodwill and celebration to smooth over contentious negotiations and present compromises as harmonious resolutions. Dynastic successions particularly benefited from this festive timing. When William the Conqueror arranged for his own coronation on Christmas Day in 1066, he wasn't just selecting a convenient date, he was making a profound political statement. The ceremony at Westminster Abbey intertwined Norman authority with both English tradition and Christian symbolism, presenting the violent conquest as a divinely ordained transition occurring at the most spiritually significant time of year. The cheering crowds inside the church, misinterpreted by Norman guards as rebellion, actually demonstrated how the festive atmosphere could mask underlying tensions during delicate power transfers. This strategic alignment with seasonal patterns allowed rulers to embed new authority within what felt like natural evolution rather than imposed change. The annual return of winter celebrations created a sense of continuity that helped populations accept even dramatic political shifts as part of larger, predictable cycles. A new tax system announced during solstice festivities could be presented as part of the natural renewal of the year rather than an arbitrary imposition. Legal reforms introduced amid Twelfth night celebrations gained legitimacy through association with the established order of seasonal observance. The psychological impact of darkness and cold played a crucial role in this process. During the deepest winter months, communities naturally turned toward sources of light, warmth, and authority for reassurance and stability. Rulers who provided magnificent celebrations during this vulnerable period positioned themselves as protectors and benefactors, creating positive associations that made populations more receptive to their political agendas. The contrast between the harsh outdoor environment and the lavish indoor festivities created a powerful emotional experience that could be harnessed to build loyalty to new regimes. Even the practical aspects of winter survival worked to the advantage of astute rulers. The need to distribute food stores and ensure community welfare during scarce months gave authorities legitimate reasons to demonstrate generosity and organizational capability. These demonstrations of effective governance during challenging times naturally reinforced political authority, making subsequent power transitions appear as logical extensions of proven leadership rather than disruptive changes. The seasonal requirement for centralized resource management provided perfect cover for consolidating administrative control while appearing to simply uphold traditional responsibilities. Among the most fascinating transformations of a winter festival lies in the story of Saturnalia and its systematic reinvention under early Christian rule. This was no accidental overlap of traditions or a simple case of one holiday replacing another. What occurred between the 4th and 6th centuries was a deliberate, calculated campaign by church authorities to dismantle a popular pagan celebration from within, preserving its appealing outer shell while completely replacing its spiritual core. They recognized that Saturnalia was far too deeply embedded in Roman cultural life to simply abolish. The week-long December festival, with its feasting, role reversals, and gift-giving, provided a crucial psychological release valve for a society with rigid social hierarchies. Rather than ordering the festivities to cease a move that would have certainly sparked resentment and resistance, Christian leaders instead masterfully co-opted its most beloved elements. The timing of Christmas provides the clearest evidence of this strategic alignment. Early Christians hadn't historically celebrated Christ's birth, and the actual date was unknown. By placing Christmas on December 25th, church authorities directly overlapped with the final day of Saturnalia and the closely related festival of Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun. This allowed them to redirect the existing cultural momentum of the season toward a new theological purpose. The birth of Christ could now be framed as the true return of the light that pagans had been celebrating all along, creating a sense of continuity that made conversion less disruptive to daily life. The familiar holiday atmosphere remained, but its meaning gradually shifted from honoring an agricultural god to celebrating a savior's birth. Even the seemingly innocuous tradition of gift-giving underwent a purposeful transformation. During Saturnalia, Romans exchanged small tokens called sigillaria, often wax candles or clay figurines, as gestures of goodwill and social bonding. Christian authorities kept the practice of giving gifts but redirected its purpose toward acts of charity and religious significance. The gifts themselves became associated with the Magi's offerings to the infant Jesus, while the act of giving was increasingly linked to Christian virtues of generosity and care for the poor. This subtle shift turned a social custom into a tool for reinforcing new religious values, allowing the population to continue enjoying familiar traditions while gradually internalizing a different worldview. The carnivalesque atmosphere of Saturnalia, with its temporary suspension of social norms, presented a particular challenge for Christian leaders. The tradition of masters serving slaves and the general atmosphere of licensed misrule contradicted the Church's emphasis on order and hierarchy. Rather than eliminating these celebrations outright, authorities gradually incorporated them into the approved structure of Christmas festivities. The role reversal elements were softened and contained within specific contexts like the Feast of Fools, where clergy themselves might engage in carefully bounded humorous behavior. This allowed the psychological release that made Saturnalia so popular to continue within a framework that ultimately reinforced rather than challenged ecclesiastical authority. Perhaps most cleverly, the Church repurposed Saturnalia's emphasis on light during the darkest days of winter. The pagan tradition of lighting candles to symbolize the returning sun became associated with Christ as the light of the world. The green decorations that adorned Roman homes during Saturnalia took on new meaning as symbols of eternal life through Christ. Even the festive feasting was preserved but recontextualized as celebration of the Incarnation rather than honoring Saturn. This approach allowed populations to maintain their cherished seasonal practices while gradually transferring their cultural allegiance from pagan emperors to Christian authority. The continuity of tradition made the change in power feel less like a conquest and more like a natural evolution, ensuring social stability during a period of profound religious transformation. Moving north from the Mediterranean world, Christian authorities and ambitious kings encountered a very different winter tradition, the deeply rooted Yule celebrations of Norse and Germanic peoples. This was not a single festival but an entire season of observance, stretching from the winter solstice through what became known as the 12 Nights of Yule. For these northern cultures, Yule represented the critical midpoint of winter, a time when the community's survival depended on collective faith, shared resources, and proper reverence for the gods who controlled the harsh elements. The depth of cultural meaning embedded in Yule practices made them far too significant to simply abolish, presenting Christian missionaries with their greatest challenge yet and their most brilliant opportunity. The strategic approach here differed markedly from the Roman model. Instead of overlaying Christian meaning onto an existing festival structure, missionaries and political allies engaged in what we might call symbolic translation. They identified elements within Yule traditions that could be reimagined through a Christian lens without completely erasing their familiar form. The Yule log, traditionally burned to honor the Norse god Thor and to ensure the sun's return, gradually transformed into a symbol of Christ as the light of the world. Families continued the practice of selecting and burning a special log, but the accompanying stories and prayers increasingly referenced Christian rather than pagan symbolism. This allowed communities to maintain a cherished custom while gradually shifting its spiritual significance. Perhaps the most dramatic transformation involved the Wild Hunt, the terrifying spectral procession led by Odin through the winter skies. This belief held powerful sway over the northern imagination, representing the dangerous supernatural forces that roamed the darkest nights. Christian authorities couldn't simply dismiss this deeply held belief, so they systematically rechanneled it. The frightening image of Odin leading his army of lost souls was gradually replaced by the more comforting figure of Saint Nicholas traveling with his helpers. The timing remained similar, the darkest period of winter, but the narrative shifted from fear to generosity, from supernatural threat to holy blessing. This psychological masterstroke addressed the same seasonal anxieties but provided a Christian solution. Scandinavian kings proved particularly adept at using this cultural synthesis for political advantage. Figures like Norway's King Olaf II recognized that imposing Christianity by force would create lasting resistance, but presenting themselves as upholders of both tradition and new faith could unite divided populations. These rulers maintained the outward forms of Yule celebrations, the feasting, the drinking of toasts, the gathering of communities, while gradually introducing Christian prayers and symbols alongside traditional ones. A king might host a magnificent Yule feast exactly as his pagan predecessors had done, but now the festivities would include a Christian blessing alongside traditional toasts to the Norse gods. This dual approach allowed populations to feel their cultural identity was being respected even as their religious practices evolved. The 12-day structure of Yule provided a perfect framework for the Christian Christmas season, though the significance of this period transformed dramatically. In pagan tradition, these 12 nights were considered a time outside of normal time, when the boundaries between worlds grew thin and supernatural events could occur. Christian authorities maintained the 12-day observance but filled it with new meaning, the celebration of Christ's birth and the subsequent feast days of saints. The sense of specialness remained, but its focus shifted from magical uncertainty to structured religious observance. This preserved the social and economic patterns of an extended winter celebration while redirecting its spiritual purpose. Even the culinary traditions of Yule underwent this strategic transformation. The brewing of special Yule ale, originally meant to honor the gods and ensure a good harvest, continued but was increasingly associated with Christian charity and celebration. The slaughter of livestock before winter, a practical necessity that had been ritualized into religious sacrifice, continued as a seasonal tradition but lost its explicit pagan connotations. By allowing these material practices to continue while gradually changing their accompanying narratives, Christian authorities and their royal allies made religious conversion feel less like cultural destruction and more like evolution. This approach didn't just create Christians, it created populations willing to accept the political authority that came with this new religious identity. Medieval monarchs facing uncertain successions or fragile claims to the throne understood that the extended Christmas season offered something invaluable, a full 12 days of choreographed political theater. These weren't spontaneous celebrations but carefully engineered demonstrations of power designed to transform vulnerability into strength. The Christmas court became a stage where new rulers could perform their authority before the very nobles who might challenge it, using festive tradition as both weapon and shield. Consider the strategic distribution of gifts during these celebrations. When a newly crowned king presented valuable objects, jeweled cups, fine textiles, or even land grants, to his nobility during Christmas feasts, he wasn't merely being generous. This ritualized gift-giving created visible bonds of obligation and reciprocity that reinforced the hierarchical structure of the realm. The selection of gifts communicated precise political messages. A particularly fine present might reward past loyalty or secure future support, while a conspicuously modest gift could signal disapproval without direct confrontation. These exchanges, conducted amid the joyful atmosphere of Christmas, naturalized what were essentially political transactions as seasonal generosity. The Christmas feast itself served as edible propaganda on a massive scale. The sheer abundance of food, elaborate meat dishes, rare spices, and flowing wine demonstrated the ruler's wealth and organizational capacity. But the seating arrangement spoke even louder than the menu. The monarch sat enthroned at the high table, physically elevated above even the highest-ranking nobles, while the precise placement of guests around the hall created a visible map of the court's political landscape. A noble seated closer to the king enjoyed enhanced status, while those placed farther away received a silent but unmistakable message about their standing. These spatial politics played out year after year, allowing rulers to adjust relationships through subtle changes in Christmas seating rather than open conflict. Religious ceremonies formed another crucial element of this political theater. The Christmas Mass provided the perfect setting for emphasizing the divine right of kings, with monarchs often occupying specially designated spaces that blurred the line between spiritual and temporal authority. The coronation of Charlemagne on Christmas Day in the year 800 set a powerful precedent, intertwining imperial power with the celebration of Christ's birth. Subsequent rulers deliberately scheduled their own coronations or important announcements during the Christmas season to benefit from this association with divine sanction. The message was clear: opposing the king meant opposing the natural and spiritual order itself. These invented traditions created predictable annual opportunities to reinforce power structures without appearing overtly authoritarian. The very repetition of Christmas rituals, the same songs, the same ceremonies, the same patterns of celebration, made the political order they represented seem timeless and natural rather than recently constructed. A noble who annually swore fealty during a Christmas ceremony eventually internalized this act as part of the seasonal rhythm rather than as political submission. The masking of raw power dynamics beneath layers of custom and religious observance made challenges to authority feel like disruptions not just of politics but of tradition itself. The extended 12-day framework allowed for particularly sophisticated political management. Each day could feature different events targeting different audiences, public festivities to demonstrate popular support, intimate gatherings to secure key alliances, religious ceremonies to emphasize spiritual legitimacy. This prolonged celebration created what we might call a festive consensus, where continuous participation in court rituals gradually built acceptance of the current power structure. By the time the season ended, both ruler and ruled had performed their relationship so thoroughly that it felt established rather than negotiated. Even the entertainment served political purposes. Specially commissioned Christmas pageants often featured allegorical stories celebrating the dynasty's legitimacy or subtly addressing current political concerns. The selection of performers, whether local troubadours or traveling artists from allied regions, communicated diplomatic relationships. The laughter and applause during these performances created emotional bonds that complemented the more formal political arrangements being reinforced elsewhere during the celebrations. In this carefully constructed environment, even pleasure became a tool of governance. While the 12 days of Christmas offered extended opportunities for political theater, the culmination of this season on Twelfth Night provided medieval rulers with their most potent symbolic moment for legitimizing power. Occurring on January 6th, the Feast of the Epiphany commemorated the Magi's visit to the infant Jesus, creating a perfect parallel for rulers seeking to present their authority as both divinely sanctioned and generously exercised. This final winter festival became the stage for some of the most sophisticated political performances of the medieval world, where the very act of gift-giving transformed into a powerful demonstration of hierarchical order. The symbolic resonance of the Magi's offerings allowed rulers to frame their political relationships within a sacred context. Just as the three kings presented gold, frankincense, and myrrh to the Christ child, monarchs would exchange gifts with their nobles and clergy in elaborately choreographed ceremonies. These weren't simple exchanges of pleasantries but carefully calibrated demonstrations of power and obligation. a ruler might present a vassal with a beautifully illuminated manuscript or a jeweled weapon, gifts that simultaneously demonstrated royal wealth, cultural sophistication, and military authority. The recipient's acceptance acknowledged their position within the hierarchy, while the nature of the gift communicated their exact standing, whether they were trusted allies requiring reinforcement or potential rivals needing appeasement. These Twelfth Night ceremonies proved particularly valuable for rulers facing succession challenges or establishing new dynasties. When Henry III held his magnificent Twelfth Night celebration in 1231, he wasn't merely marking the end of Christmas, he was reinforcing his somewhat precarious hold on the English throne. By distributing lavish gifts to his barons while receiving their symbolic offerings in return, he performed the reality of his kingship for an audience that included many who had recently opposed him in civil war. The festive atmosphere made this political theater feel like natural celebration, allowing Henry to reinforce his authority without resorting to confrontation. The tradition of selecting a Lord of Misrule for the evening might seem like simple festive fun, but it served a profound political purpose through controlled inversion. This temporary ruler, often a peasant or lower-ranking courtier, would preside over portions of the celebration, issuing humorous commands and enjoying mock authority. Far from challenging the established order, this ritual actually reinforced it by demonstrating what improper rule looked like. The absurdity of the temporary ruler's commands highlighted the wisdom of the actual monarch's governance, while the eventual restoration of proper order made the normal hierarchy feel both necessary and natural. This carnivalesque safety valve allowed for temporary release of social tensions without threatening the underlying power structure. Twelfth Night also provided the perfect cover for announcing significant political decisions that might otherwise face resistance. The declaration of new taxes, the appointment of officials, or even the resolution of territorial disputes could be presented during the festivities, framed as seasonal gifts or natural developments rather than imposed changes. The psychological atmosphere of celebration made audiences more receptive to announcements that might seem burdensome under normal circumstances. A noble who might protest a land settlement in the royal council chamber would find it more difficult to object during a feast where he was holding a gold cup given by the king himself. The spatial arrangements of Twelfth Night celebrations reinforced these political messages with physical immediacy. The monarch would typically occupy a throne positioned to recall both the manger of Christ and the seat of judgment, blending religious and temporal authority into a single powerful image. The circulation of food and drink followed strict protocols that visually demonstrated the chain of command, with dishes passing from ruler to courtier in a visible performance of patronage and dependence. Even the entertainment, often pageants depicting the adoration of the mage, subtly reinforced the message that proper order involved both offering gifts to superiors and receiving blessings from them. This sophisticated use of Twelfth Night celebrations represents perhaps the pinnacle of medieval political theater, where every element from the gifts exchanged to the foods consumed, from the songs sung to the roles temporarily inverted, worked to naturalize power relationships through the comforting framework of familiar tradition. The very repetition of these ceremonies year after year made the political order they represented seem as inevitable and cyclical as the changing seasons themselves, masking the often contentious reality of medieval power struggles beneath layers of ritual and celebration. Beyond the pageantry of feasts and gifts, medieval rulers recognized the winter solstice's profound psychological power as a natural reset point for entire societies. This astronomical event marked not just the gradual return of sunlight, but a deep-seated human impulse for new beginnings that astute leaders could harness for governance. The solstice created what we might call a collective psychological opening, a moment when communities, having endured the year's darkest days, became uniquely receptive to messages of renewal and change. This made it the perfect occasion to introduce administrative adjustments that might otherwise seem burdensome or arbitrary. Tax collection provides a compelling example of this strategic timing. Rather than demanding payments at random intervals throughout the year, many medieval governments aligned their fiscal calendars with the solstice cycle. In England, the traditional quarter days when rents and taxes fell due included Christmas itself, directly connecting financial obligations to the festive season. This timing transformed what could have been resented as mere extraction into something that felt like part of the natural order. The same communities that celebrated the sun's return also accepted their fiscal responsibilities as part of the seasonal rhythm, with the goodwill generated by celebrations making compliance feel almost voluntary rather than coerced. Legal systems similarly benefited from this solstice alignment. New laws and ordinances announced during winter festivals gained legitimacy through association with the concept of renewal. When King Alfred the Great issued his legal code in the late 9th century, he deliberately framed it within the context of moral and spiritual renewal appropriate to the Christmas season. The connection to solstice celebrations allowed rulers to present legal changes not as arbitrary exercises of power but as natural evolutions, as inevitable as the sun's return after the darkness of winter. This metaphorical framing made populations more willing to accept new regulations that might otherwise have faced resistance. The solstice also provided ideal conditions for announcing governmental reforms and administrative changes. A reorganization of local governance or the appointment of new officials could be introduced amid the festivities, benefiting from the general atmosphere of optimism and renewal. The psychological contrast between the cold darkness outside and the warm, lighted celebrations inside created a powerful emotional backdrop for promising better governance. Rulers could position themselves as bringing light and order just as the sun itself began its gradual return, making political initiatives feel divinely sanctioned rather than merely human inventions. This strategic timing extended to international relations and diplomatic announcements as well. Peace treaties and alliance agreements were frequently finalized and proclaimed during solstice celebrations, using the season's message of hope and renewal to frame political arrangements. The Christmas peace declared by various medieval monarchs, temporary truces in ongoing conflicts, often evolved into more permanent settlements announced amid the festivities. The emotional resonance of the season helped parties overcome lingering animosities and accept compromises that might have seemed impossible under different circumstances. Even economic policies found natural expression during this period. The establishment of new markets, the adjustment of trade regulations, or the introduction of currency reforms could all be presented as part of the seasonal renewal. The solstice marked both an ending and a beginning in the agricultural calendar, making it the logical moment for economic recalibration. Populations accustomed to settling accounts and planning for the new growing season at this time of year proved more receptive to broader economic changes when they were introduced within this familiar framework. The brilliance of using the solstice as a political calendar marker lay in its universality and inevitability. Unlike arbitrary dates chosen by rulers, the winter solstice occurred with perfect predictability, governed by natural laws beyond human manipulation. By aligning their political calendars with this celestial event, medieval rulers connected their governance to something eternal and unchanging. The authority they exercised appeared not as personal whim but as part of the natural order itself, with administrative changes seeming as inevitable as the season's turning. This subtle association made political power feel less like human invention and more like natural law. a psychological masterstroke that helped stabilize regimes during times of transition. This strategic alignment of sacred calendars represents one of history's most brilliant exercises in soft power, where the Church recognized that changing what people celebrated required working with rather than against deeply ingrained seasonal rhythms. Ecclesiastical authorities didn't merely select random dates for Christian festivals, they engaged in what we might call chronological diplomacy, carefully mapping the new religious calendar onto existing pagan frameworks to create a sense of seamless transition. This approach demonstrated remarkable psychological insight, understanding that populations could more easily accept new beliefs if they arrived wrapped in familiar temporal patterns. The placement of Christmas on December 25th provides the most famous example of this strategy, but the pattern extended throughout the liturgical year. The spring festival of Easter, celebrating fertility and renewal among Germanic peoples, became the Christian Easter commemorating resurrection. The Roman festival of Liminality, focused on appeasing restless spirits, evolved into All Saints and All Souls Days honoring the Christian dead. Even the summer solstice celebrations found their counterpart in the feast of St. John the Baptist on June 24th. Each of these alignments allowed the Church to acknowledge the natural human impulse to mark seasonal changes while gradually redirecting that impulse toward Christian theology. This calendar strategy proved particularly effective because it addressed both the practical and emotional dimensions of timekeeping. Rural communities had always organized their agricultural years around pagan festivals that marked planting, harvesting, and seasonal transitions. By maintaining these temporal landmarks while changing their spiritual significance, the Church ensured that Christian observance felt integrated with daily life rather than imposed upon it. A farmer could continue to celebrate the winter solstice as he always had, but now he did so within the framework of Christmas, gradually internalizing the new religious meaning while maintaining the familiar seasonal rhythm. The fixed annual cycle of celebrations created what we might call ritual reinforcement opportunities, predictable moments when the Church could assert its authority and strengthen its relationship with secular powers. Coronations, treaty signings, and important political announcements were frequently scheduled to coincide with major feast days, intertwining religious and temporal authority in the public imagination. When a king was crowned on Easter Sunday or a peace treaty signed on Christmas Day, the event gained spiritual legitimacy while simultaneously reinforcing the Church's role as the ultimate source of validation for political power. This calendar alignment also facilitated the Church's own internal governance by creating a predictable framework for ecclesiastical administration. The liturgical year organized not just worship but also the collection of tithes, the convening of synods, and the rotation of clerical assignments. This regularity helped stabilize the Church's expanding institutional presence across diverse regions, creating a unified temporal framework that transcended local customs and political boundaries. The same Christmas Mass was celebrated from Italy to Ireland, creating a sense of universal community that strengthened the Church's claim to Catholic, meaning universal authority. Perhaps most importantly, this strategic calendar management allowed the Church to gradually shift populations from multiple local temporalities to a single Christian chronology. Before this unification, different regions might mark time according to various pagan calendars, royal accession years, or local seasonal events. The Christian liturgical calendar provided a common framework that eventually became the standard way of marking time throughout medieval Europe. This temporal unification represented a profound consolidation of both religious and cultural power, making Christian time synonymous with time itself in the European imagination. The repetition of these aligned celebrations year after year created what anthropologists call habitus, the ingrained habits and dispositions that shape how people perceive and operate in the world. Through annual repetition, Christian interpretations of seasonal events became second nature, their pagan origins gradually fading from collective memory. The winter solstice became Christmas so completely that eventually most people forgot there had ever been a time when the two were separate. This gradual naturalization of Christian time represents one of the most successful long-term cultural projects in history, all achieved through the strategic alignment of calendars rather than through force or coercion. What appeared as simple generosity during winter celebrations actually represented one of medieval Europe's most sophisticated political technologies, the strategic use of gift exchange to reinforce power structures through what anthropologists would later call ceremonial reciprocity. These carefully choreographed presentations of gifts were never random acts of holiday spirit, but deliberate performances designed to make political hierarchy feel both natural and mutually beneficial. The distribution followed precise protocols that communicated exact positions within the social order, with the quality and nature of each present speaking a language of power that every courtier understood perfectly. Consider the symbolic weight carried by even seemingly straightforward gifts. When a monarch presented a loyal noble with a jewel-encrusted sword during Christmas festivities, this wasn't merely a weapon but a complex political message. The valuable materials demonstrated royal wealth. The weapon itself symbolized military authority delegated to the recipient, and the act of presentation created an obligation for future loyalty. Similarly, when ecclesiastical authorities received beautifully illuminated religious texts from their royal patrons, these gifts acknowledged the Church's spiritual authority while simultaneously reminding religious leaders of their dependence on temporal power for material support. Each exchange reinforced the existing hierarchy while creating networks of obligation that bound the political community together. The direction of gift flow proved particularly revealing of power dynamics. Downward gifts from rulers to subjects typically consisted of valuable objects, gold cups, fine textiles, hunting birds, or land grants. These presents emphasized the monarch's role as provider and benefactor, demonstrating the material benefits of loyalty. Upward gifts from subjects to rulers often took more symbolic forms, handcrafted items, locally produced specialties, or artworks celebrating the dynasty. These offerings acknowledged authority without challenging the ruler's superior wealth and status. The careful balance maintained the fiction of reciprocity while never obscuring the reality of hierarchical relationships. Records from the Burgundian court during the 15th century reveal how meticulously these exchanges were documented and managed. Special officials maintained detailed lists of who received what gifts, with values carefully calibrated to match the recipient's importance and current standing. A noble who had recently provided military support might receive significantly more valuable presents than one whose loyalty seemed uncertain, with these differences communicated through the public spectacle of gift distribution during winter feasts. The public nature of these exchanges made them powerful political theater, allowing the entire court to witness the mapping of relationships through material objects. The psychological brilliance of this system lay in its transformation of political obligation into something that felt voluntary and even joyful. A vassal who received an expensive Christmas gift from his king experienced genuine gratitude and pleasure, emotions that naturally fostered continued loyalty. The festive context made these exchanges feel like seasonal generosity rather than calculated political transactions, allowing rulers to reinforce power structures through positive emotions rather than mere coercion. This emotional dimension proved far more effective than simple force in maintaining long-term stability, as subjects came to see their relationship with authority as personally beneficial rather than merely imposed. Even the wrapping and presentation of gifts carried symbolic significance. Elaborate packaging, ceremonial delivery by high-ranking officials, and public unveiling before the entire court. All these elements heightened the emotional impact and political message of each exchange. The theatricality transformed simple object transfer into memorable events that participants would discuss throughout the year, continually reinforcing the relationships established during the winter celebrations. The memory of receiving a particular gift from the king's own hand during Christmas festivities could influence a noble's behavior long after the seasonal decorations had been stored away. This system of ritualized gift exchange created what we might call an economy of honor, where material objects circulated as visible tokens of political relationships. The value of these presents wasn't merely their monetary worth, but their symbolic capital, the honor they conferred upon both giver and receiver. A beautifully crafted gold cup given by a king carried with it a piece of royal favor that enhanced the recipient's status among his peers. This economy operated alongside conventional markets but followed its own rules and values, with winter festivals providing the annual settling of accounts in this parallel system of political currency. The grandeur of a medieval winter feast extended far beyond mere sustenance. It was a meticulously staged performance where every morsel of food and every sip of wine carried profound political significance. These events transformed the Great Hall into a living map of power relationships, with the seating arrangement alone speaking volumes about the current state of court politics. The monarch always occupied the central high table, elevated on a dais that physically and symbolically separated royalty from even the highest nobility. But the precise placement of guests created a constantly shifting landscape of favor and influence. A baron seated to the king's immediate right might be enjoying newfound prestige, while a once trusted advisor positioned farther down the table could be receiving a silent but unmistakable message about their diminished standing. This gastronomic theater allowed rulers to adjust political relationships through subtle spatial changes rather than open confrontation, using the festive atmosphere to soften what were essentially power maneuvers. The menu itself served as edible propaganda, with each dish carefully selected to communicate specific messages about the ruler's wealth, global connections, and generosity. Exotic spices like saffron and pepper, transported at great expense from distant lands, demonstrated the monarch's access to international trade networks that lesser nobles could only imagine. Impressive centerpieces like roasted swans or peacocks served in their full plumage weren't just culinary delights, they were displays of the ruler's ability to command nature itself for the pleasure of guests. When Richard II hosted his legendary Christmas feast in 1387, the staggering variety of dishes, from venison and wild boar to elaborate sugar sculptures, wasn't merely about indulgence, but about demonstrating the Plantagenet dynasty's stability and abundance during a period of considerable political tension. The message was clear: loyalty to such a generous and powerful monarch would always be rewarded with protection and prosperity. Service order and protocol added another layer of political communication to these festive gatherings. The sequence in which guests received their food precisely mirrored the social hierarchy, with the most favored courtiers served first from the choicest portions while those of lower status waited their turn. Special ceremonial foods often made their debut during these occasions, creating new traditions that reinforced the current power structure. The Christmas pie, containing various meats and spices, became particularly associated with Tudor celebrations, its richness symbolizing the dynasty's supposed golden age. When Henry VIII introduced new dishes or serving styles, he wasn't merely updating the menu but signaling cultural innovation under his rule, presenting himself as a modernizing force while maintaining the comforting continuity of seasonal celebration. Perhaps most ingeniously, winter feasts provided the perfect setting for incorporating previously excluded groups into the political fold. A newly powerful merchant family might receive their first invitation to a royal Christmas celebration, their presence at the tables both a reward for financial support and a demonstration of the expanding base of royal authority. Foreign diplomats found themselves welcomed at these gatherings, where the shared experience of feasting could smooth over diplomatic tensions that might have stalled in more formal settings. Even representatives from recently subdued regions might find themselves guests at the king's table, their participation in the festivities serving as public ratification of their submission to the new order. The communal consumption of food and drink created emotional bonds that helped transform political relationships from theoretical arrangements into personal commitments. The psychological impact of these culinary spectacles cannot be overstated. In an era of frequent food scarcity, the overwhelming abundance displayed at winter feasts, the mountains of bread, the rivers of wine, the seemingly endless procession of dishes, created a powerful emotional experience that naturally fostered loyalty to the provider. The warmth of the great hall, the fragrance of spices, the visual splendor of the decorations, all worked on the senses to create a state of receptive generosity in the guests. A noble who might have arrived with reservations about a new tax or policy could find his resistance softening amid such lavish hospitality, the political message of the feast working on him through his stomach as much as his mind. This transformation of necessary eating into persuasive political performance represents one of the most sophisticated applications of soft power in medieval governance, where the simple act of sharing a meal became a tool for building consensus and reinforcing authority during the darkest days of winter. The architecture of power extended far beyond castle walls during these winter celebrations, with medieval rulers transforming both interior spaces and entire cityscapes into stages for their authority. In the great hall where feasts unfolded, the monarch's throne wasn't simply placed, it was strategically positioned to maximize psychological impact. Typically set upon a raised dais at the hall's end, the throne became the natural focal point that every guest would face throughout the festivities. This elevation wasn't merely physical but symbolic, placing the ruler literally above even the highest-ranking nobles while ensuring their presence dominated the space. The hall's design often featured a single central aisle leading directly to the throne, forcing anyone approaching to make what felt like a pilgrimage to authority. Windows might be positioned to allow winter light to illuminate the monarch at certain hours, creating almost theatrical lighting effects that enhanced their perceived divinity. Even the heating arrangements served political purposes, with the royal area typically kept warmest while those farther from the center experienced the winter chill more directly, physically reinforcing the benefits of proximity to power. Beyond the palace walls, rulers extended this spatial manipulation to the very streets of their cities. Processional routes for winter celebrations were carefully planned to maximize visibility and emphasize royal control over urban spaces. When a monarch traveled to Christmas Mass or participated in public festivities, their route would typically pass by important civic buildings, market squares, and churches, visually connecting royal authority with centers of commerce, religion, and governance. These processions weren't random parades but carefully choreographed movements that transformed the city into a living map of power relationships. Citizens lining the streets to watch became involuntary participants in this spatial performance, their very positioning often dictated by social status, with elites closer to the action reinforcing the hierarchical order. The temporary decorations along these routes, funded by the crown but often created by guilds and citizen groups, created a shared investment in the spectacle that made the population complicit in celebrating the very authority that governed them. Special viewing platforms and temporary structures added another layer to this architectural theater. During Twelfth Night celebrations or public gift distributions, rulers would often appear on specially constructed balconies or stages that physically elevated them above the crowds while simultaneously making them visible to larger audiences. These structures weren't merely practical but deeply symbolic, creating a clear separation between ruler and ruled while allowing for the performance of generosity and authority. The design of these platforms often incorporated architectural elements from the permanent palace, creating visual continuity between the temporary festive space and the permanent seat of power. This connection helped naturalize royal authority by making it appear consistent across both ordinary and celebratory contexts. The temporary transformation of spaces through decorations and lighting represented perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of this spatial manipulation. During the 12 days of Christmas, great halls and public spaces underwent dramatic changes that transported participants from ordinary reality into what felt like a magical realm. Evergreen boughs, holly, and ivy brought inside despite the winter cold created a powerful symbol of life persisting through darkness, a metaphor easily extended to the ruling dynasty's enduring power. The strategic placement of candles and lanterns didn't just illuminate spaces but directed attention, with the brightest light naturally falling on the monarch and the areas of most important ceremonial activity. The scent of special festive spices and foods further enhanced this transformation of space, engaging multiple senses to create an immersive experience that made the political messages being delivered feel more like natural truths than constructed narratives. This architectural and spatial manipulation worked so effectively because it operated on both conscious and subconscious levels. While participants might notice the grandeur of the decorations or the impressiveness of the throne placement, they were less likely to recognize how these elements were systematically shaping their experience of power. The repetition of these spatial arrangements year after year made them feel traditional and natural rather than deliberately constructed, allowing rulers to reinforce their authority through the very familiarity of the festive environment. The emotional resonance of winter celebrations, the warmth amid cold, the light amid darkness, the abundance amid scarcity, became subtly attached to the ruler who provided these experiences, creating deep psychological associations between royal authority and comfort, security, and joy. In this way, the temporary transformation of space during winter festivals became one of the most powerful and enduring tools for making political power feel not just acceptable but desirable to those who experienced it. The resonant power of music and the compelling drama of live performance became indispensable tools in the medieval ruler's arsenal, transforming winter festivals into immersive experiences where authority wasn't just declared but felt in the very bones of every spectator. These weren't casual entertainments but carefully crafted political statements set to music and choreographed to perfection. When a monarch commissioned a new Christmas Mass or a Twelfth Night pageant, they were engaging in sophisticated psychological operations that worked on multiple levels simultaneously, emotional, intellectual, and social, to naturalize their power through the irresistible medium of art. Consider the strategic composition of special Christmas music that would become associated with particular dynasties. The medieval practice of writing royal masses, specifically for Christmas celebrations, allowed composers to weave the ruler's name and praises directly into the sacred liturgy. As congregations sang these specially commissioned works year after year, they unconsciously internalized the connection between divine worship and loyalty to their earthly ruler. The soaring melodies and complex polyphony of these compositions didn't just demonstrate the court's cultural sophistication, they created emotional states of awe and reverence that naturally extended to the patron who had made such beauty possible. The very difficulty of performing these works, requiring trained choirs and skilled musicians, highlighted the ruler's ability to command specialized resources that ordinary people could only marvel at. Theatrical performances during winter festivals offered even more direct opportunities for political messaging. Elaborate mystery plays and morality dramas, often presented in the Great Hall or the town square, frequently included allegorical representations of current political situations. A disputed succession might be framed as a struggle between orderly virtue and chaotic vice, with the current ruler naturally occupying the heroic role. Historical episodes would be carefully selected and reinterpreted to justify present policies or legitimize questionable claims to power. When Henry VII commissioned Christmas entertainments after his victory at Bosworth Field, the performances invariably depicted the Tudor accession as the restoration of order after chaos, using the emotional power of drama to transform a bloody conquest into a blessed deliverance. The social dynamics of performance attendance reinforced hierarchy, even as the content of the performances reinforced political narratives. Seating arrangements during musical and theatrical events precisely mirrored the court's power structure, with the best views and most comfortable positions reserved for those highest in favor. The act of gathering the entire court or community for these performances created a visible manifestation of the ruler's ability to command presence and attention. The shared experience of watching the same drama or hearing the same music created what we might call emotional synchronization, aligning the audience's feelings and reactions in ways that fostered group cohesion around the values being presented. The repetitive nature of these festive performances year after year created powerful collective memories that gradually overwrote inconvenient historical facts with more flattering narratives. A dynasty that had come to power through violence might commission annual Christmas pageants depicting their founder as a peacemaker, until eventually the artistic representation became more real in the popular imagination than the actual events. The emotional resonance of these performances, the laughter during comic interludes, the tears during tragic scenes, the awe during spectacular effects, made their messages far more persuasive than dry official proclamations. People might question a royal edict, but few could resist the emotional pull of a well-told story set to beautiful music. Even the choice of performers communicated political messages. When a ruler imported musicians from Italy or actors from France for their Christmas celebrations, they were demonstrating their international connections and cultural sophistication. The employment of local artisans and performers alongside these imported talents showed both respect for tradition and openness to innovation. The funding of these cultural productions created economic dependencies that bound artists and craftspeople to the regime, making them stakeholders in its continuation. A minstrel who composed songs praising the royal family or a playwright who created flattering dramas knew that their livelihood depended on maintaining favor, creating a cultural ecosystem that naturally supported the existing power structure. The lasting impact of these musical and theatrical strategies can be seen in how many winter performance traditions continue to carry political undertones today. The British monarch's Christmas broadcast, the performance of Handel's Messiah, originally composed for charitable purposes that reinforced royal authority. Even the persistent tradition of political leaders attending seasonal performances all echo these medieval practices of using winter entertainment to reinforce political authority through shared cultural experience. The genius of this approach lay in its ability to make governance feel not like imposed control but like natural cultural expression, weaving power so thoroughly into the fabric of celebration that the two became indistinguishable to those experiencing them. Beyond the sensory spectacle of feasts and performances lay a more practical foundation for political power the massive economic engine required to stage these winter celebrations. The sheer scale of resources needed to fund weeks of festivities created a web of financial dependencies that bound entire communities to their rulers in relationships of mutual interest. When a medieval monarch decided to host an elaborate Christmas court or a magnificent Twelfth night celebration, they weren't just spending wealth, they were strategically redistributing it in ways that reinforced their authority through economic means as much as symbolic ones. Consider the staggering quantities involved in these winter festivities. Records from the court of Richard II show that his Christmas celebrations in 1387 required 28 oxen, 300 sheep, and countless fowl, along with enormous quantities of bread, ale, and wine. This wasn't merely consumption, but calculated economic stimulus. The purchasing of these provisions injected massive sums into local economies, benefiting everyone from farmers and butchers to bakers and brewers. The ruler who could consistently fund such extravagance demonstrated not just wealth but the organizational capacity to mobilize entire economic networks, proving their fitness to govern through their ability to orchestrate abundance. This economic activity created what we might call a festival economy, a parallel economic system that operated alongside ordinary markets but followed different rules and rhythms. Artisans and craftspeople knew that the winter season would bring commissions for everything from elaborate costumes for pageants to specialized cooking equipment for feasts. Musicians could count on employment during the weeks of celebration, while scribes found work creating invitations, menus, and programs. The construction of temporary stages, viewing platforms, and decorations employed carpenters, painters, and cloth workers who might otherwise struggle to find work during the winter months. This created a broad constituency with material reasons to support the current regime, not out of ideological conviction but simple economic self-interest. The timing of these economic benefits proved particularly strategic. Winter was traditionally the most economically vulnerable season for medieval societies, when food stores were dwindling and little agricultural work was available. By concentrating their spending during this period, rulers provided a crucial economic buffer that helped communities weather the lean months. A peasant who earned extra coin helping to prepare the castle for Christmas celebrations, or a merchant who sold textiles for festive decorations, had practical reasons to appreciate the ruler's generosity. This seasonal economic intervention made royal authority feel less like abstract power and more like tangible benefit, transforming subjects into stakeholders in the system. The distribution patterns of this festival spending reinforced social hierarchies while creating cross-class investment in the status quo. Nobles received the most visible benefits: direct gifts, privileged access to lucrative contracts, and opportunities to display their own wealth through participation. But the economic ripple effects extended far down the social ladder. The farmer who supplied grain for the Christmas ale, the candlemaker whose products illuminated the Great Hall, the stable hand employed to care for visitors' horses, all became indirect beneficiaries of royal patronage. This created a broad base of support that transcended class divisions, as people at multiple economic levels found reasons to value the current power structure. The predictability of these seasonal economic injections allowed entire industries to develop around servicing winter celebrations. Specialized crafts emerged for creating festive decorations. Musical instruments were manufactured specifically for holiday performances, and certain foods became associated exclusively with winter festivals. This professional specialization created groups with vested interests in maintaining both the celebrations themselves and the political systems that funded them. A master baker known for his elaborate Christmas pies, or a family of musicians specializing in festive music, had career reasons to support the continuation of current traditions. and by extension, the authorities who sustained those traditions. Perhaps most ingeniously, the economic dimension of festival sponsorship allowed rulers to transform potential critics into partners. A merchant who might have questioned royal policies found himself supplying wine for the Christmas feast under lucrative terms. A guildmaster who could have been a voice of opposition instead received commissions to create ceremonial objects for the celebrations. Even local officials who might have resisted new taxes became involved in organizing public festivities that demonstrated their own importance within the system. This co-option through economic participation created a powerful silencing mechanism. Those who benefited financially from the status quo were less likely to challenge it, even if they had ideological reservations. The accounting of these expenditures itself became a tool of governance, with meticulous records demonstrating both the scale of royal generosity and the precise distribution of benefits. When nobles saw in writing exactly how much the crown had spent on their gifts, or how many resources had been dedicated to entertaining their households, they received tangible evidence of their value within the system. These records also allowed rulers to strategically adjust their spending from year to year, rewarding loyalty with increased patronage and signaling disapproval through reduced benefits without ever needing to state the reasons explicitly. The economic language of festival spending became a subtle dialect of power that every courtier learned to read fluently. This economic ecosystem created what we might call a circular system of obligation and benefit. The taxes and revenues that flowed upward to the crown throughout the year partially flowed back downward during winter celebrations in the form of patronage, employment, and direct gifts. This circulation transformed what might have been resented as extraction into something that felt more like reciprocal exchange. Subjects who contributed to royal coffers could see their resources returned to them in the form of festive employment, market opportunities, and community benefits. This perception of reciprocity made the entire economic system feel more balanced and just, reducing resistance to royal authority while simultaneously demonstrating the crown's central role in maintaining economic stability. This deliberate blending of traditions was no accidental cultural drift but a masterclass in political strategy, where medieval rulers and church leaders recognized that the fastest way to the people's hearts was through their cherished seasonal rituals. The strategic incorporation of pagan elements into Christian winter celebrations represented a sophisticated understanding that cultural identity runs deeper than theological doctrine, and that the most effective way to govern is to make new authority feel familiar rather than foreign. This syncretic approach allowed for what we might call spiritual continuity, maintaining the comforting surface of tradition while gradually shifting its underlying meaning toward new power structures. Consider the fascinating transformation of the Christmas tree, which evolved from pre-Christian traditions of bringing evergreen boughs indoors during winter to symbolize life's persistence amid darkness. Rather than banning this deeply rooted practice, Christian authorities in Germany gradually reinterpreted it through a theological lens, with the triangular shape coming to represent the Holy Trinity and the light symbolizing Christ as the light of the world. This allowed communities to continue their beloved custom while gradually associating it with new religious concepts. The tree itself remained, but its meaning slowly shifted from pagan symbol to Christian emblem, demonstrating how syncretism could transform practices without erasing them. The timing of Christmas itself provides perhaps the most brilliant example of this strategic alignment. By placing the celebration of Christ's birth on December 25th, church authorities directly overlapped with existing Roman festivals of Saturnalia and Sol Invictus, the birthday of the unconquered sun. This wasn't merely convenient scheduling but deliberate theological positioning. The birth of Christ could now be presented as the true return of the light that pagans had been celebrating all along. This framing created a sense of continuity that made religious conversion feel less like abandonment of tradition and more like fulfillment of it, allowing populations to maintain their seasonal rhythms while gradually internalizing new beliefs. Even seemingly minor festive elements underwent this strategic transformation. The tradition of hanging mistletoe, sacred to Druidic traditions as a symbol of vitality and fertility, was permitted to continue but gradually associated with Christian concepts of love and reconciliation. The Yule log, originally a Norse tradition honoring Thor, continued to be burned but with new prayers and blessings that redirected its spiritual significance toward Christian themes. These subtle adaptations allowed people to feel their cultural heritage was being respected even as their religious allegiance shifted, reducing resistance to both spiritual and political changes. This syncretic approach proved particularly valuable for rulers managing religious transitions within their territories. When King Stephen of Hungary sought to Christianize his kingdom in the early 11th century, he famously advised his missionaries to build churches on existing pagan holy sites and to allow converted populations to maintain certain traditional practices within a Christian framework. This strategy recognized that people form deep attachments to places and rituals, and that forcing abrupt change creates resistance while gradual transformation fosters acceptance. The same approach applied to winter celebrations, where the familiar sights, sounds, and smells of traditional festivals could continue even as their underlying meanings evolved. The psychological brilliance of this strategy lay in its acknowledgement that cultural identity is often tied more to practices than to beliefs. A family that had always brought greenery indoors at midwinter or lit special candles during the darkest days could continue these comforting rituals while gradually learning new stories and prayers to accompany them. This made the transition to Christianity feel less like cultural loss and more like cultural enrichment, as traditions gained additional layers of meaning rather than being replaced entirely. The emotional security provided by this continuity made populations more receptive to the political changes that accompanied religious conversion. This syncretic approach also created opportunities for rulers to position themselves as bridges between old and new, tradition and innovation. A monarch could present themselves as the protector of cherished customs while simultaneously guiding their people toward new religious understandings. This dual role enhanced royal authority by making the ruler appear both respectful of tradition and visionary in their leadership. The winter celebrations became perfect demonstrations of this balanced approach, where familiar festivities continued but with subtle modifications that reinforced the new political and religious order. The resulting hybrid celebrations ultimately served as powerful unifying forces in often fractious medieval societies. By incorporating elements from various cultural traditions, winter festivals could appeal to diverse populations within a realm, creating shared experiences that transcended regional differences. A Christmas celebration that included both Germanic Yule elements and Roman Saturnalia traditions could help forge a common cultural identity among populations that might otherwise see themselves as distinct. This unifying function made winter festivals invaluable tools for state building, turning what might have been divisive religious differences into inclusive seasonal traditions. Perhaps most counterintuitively, the very act of temporarily overturning the social order during winter festivals served to strengthen it in the long run. Medieval rulers demonstrated remarkable psychological insight by permitting and even encouraging controlled periods of misrule where normal hierarchies were playfully inverted. During Saturnalia, slaves might dine with their masters. At Twelfth night celebrations, a commoner could be crowned Lord of Misrule and issue ridiculous commands that even nobles had to obey. These sanctioned rebellions created crucial safety valves that allowed social tensions to dissipate harmlessly within carefully bounded contexts, preventing them from building into genuine challenges to authority. This carnivalesque inversion worked so effectively because it provided the psychological satisfaction of resistance without the actual risk of revolution. When a peasant could briefly play the king or a servant could mock their master in a festive play, they experienced a cathartic release of frustrations that might otherwise have festered into genuine discontent. The very absurdity of these role reversals, the obvious unsuitability of the temporary rulers, highlighted the naturalness of the established order by contrast. Everyone could laugh at the foolishness of the Lord of Misrule precisely because they understood this was not how society should actually function, making the return to normalcy feel like a relief rather than an imposition. The boundaries of this licensed misrule were always carefully controlled by authorities. The period of inversion had a definite end point, usually the conclusion of the festival, and the behaviors permitted, however outrageous, remained within certain limits. Physical violence was rarely tolerated, and direct challenges to fundamental religious or political doctrines remained off limits. This careful containment ensured that the temporary suspension of order ultimately reinforced the system by demonstrating that chaos, even in playful form, needed structure to prevent it from becoming truly destructive. The message was clear: a little madness was acceptable within certain bounds and time frames, but society ultimately required stable hierarchy to function properly. The return to normalcy after these festive periods proved particularly powerful in naturalizing everyday power structures. After days of exaggerated role reversal and licensed foolishness, the resumption of ordinary social relationships felt comforting and right rather than oppressive. The temporary disorder made the familiar hierarchy appear not as arbitrary imposition but as the natural state of affairs, the way things were meant to be. This psychological contrast effect helped populations accept their ordinary positions within the social structure with renewed contentment, having briefly experienced the chaos that might result from truly challenging that structure. Even the satire and criticism permitted during these periods served to strengthen the system by providing a forum for airing grievances without requiring actual change. When court jesters mocked their monarchs in winter entertainments or commoners performed plays gently satirizing local authorities, these performances acknowledged existing tensions while containing them within safe, ritualized formats. The very act of giving voice to criticism in a context where everyone understood it was just play actually diffused its revolutionary potential. People felt heard without the system having to actually change in response, creating the illusion of responsiveness while maintaining stability. This sophisticated understanding of carnivalesque inversion represents one of the most clever applications of psychological insight in medieval governance. Rather than suppressing all expressions of dissent, an approach that often breeds resentment and eventual rebellion, rulers created contained spaces where dissent could be safely expressed and thereby neutralized. The winter festivals provided the perfect context for this strategy, as their established traditions and limited duration created natural boundaries for licensed misbehavior. The emotional intensity of the celebrations, the combination of darkness, cold, feasting, and community created conditions where people could experience the thrill of resistance without any real risk, returning to their ordinary lives with their frustrations eased and their acceptance of the status quo subtly reinforced. Winter celebrations became the medieval world's most sophisticated communication network, a time when rulers and religious authorities could weave their preferred narratives into the very fabric of seasonal joy. Unlike formal proclamations read in town squares or dry legal documents, The stories told during these festive periods worked on people through emotion, tradition, and repetition, embedding political messages within experiences that felt personal and culturally authentic. A king's coronation might be announced during a Christmas sermon, not as a political event but as part of the nativity story, framing the new monarch within the context of divinely ordained leadership. The same congregation that might question a tax increase announced by royal decree would more readily accept it when presented during a festive mass as necessary for maintaining the community's welfare, much like the Holy Family's need for shelter. The annual repetition of these narratives proved particularly powerful in shaping collective memory and acceptance. A Christmas play performed year after year that depicted a recent dynastic change as a peaceful and welcome transition gradually overwrote the actual memory of conflict and resistance that may have occurred. With each retelling, the crafted narrative felt more true, eventually becoming the accepted version of events. This gradual reinforcement allowed authorities to manage how populations understood and remembered power shifts, transforming contentious takeovers into stories of natural succession and divine favor. The festive context made these stories feel like timeless tradition rather than recent political invention, granting them an authority that straightforward propaganda could never achieve. Songs and carols became especially effective tools for this narrative control, their catchy melodies ensuring that political messages would be remembered and repeated long after the festivities ended. A specially composed Christmas carol celebrating a new ruler's generosity or a hymn linking their reign to Christ's kingship could be sung in churches, homes, and public spaces, spreading the desired narrative through the irresistible medium of music. These musical messages bypassed rational skepticism and worked directly on the emotions, creating positive associations with the current power structure through the joyful experience of communal singing. The same tune that brought comfort and seasonal cheer also carried subtle political reinforcement, making loyalty to the regime feel as natural and right as celebrating the winter solstice. Even the oral traditions surrounding winter celebrations, the stories told around fires, the explanations of customs passed between generations, could be subtly guided to support current power structures. Church authorities might reframe the meaning of traditional practices, explaining that the Yule log actually symbolized Christ's light rather than Thor's protection, or that gift-giving reflected the Magi's offerings rather than Roman Saturnalia customs. These narrative adjustments happened gradually through countless small conversations rather than formal decrees, making the shift in understanding feel organic rather than imposed. The emotional resonance of these stories, shared in the intimate setting of family gatherings during the darkest days of year, gave them persuasive power that no official edict could match, turning winter festivals into the perfect vehicles for managing how populations perceived and accepted the changing structures of power around them. William the Conqueror understood that his victory at Hastings in 1066 gave him the crown, but it couldn't guarantee the loyalty of a defeated and resentful Anglo-Saxon population. His brilliant solution to weaponize the Christmas season as a tool of political theater, transforming what could have been a tense occupation into a carefully staged performance of power and generosity. That first Christmas following the conquest wasn't merely a celebration, it was a masterclass in psychological warfare disguised as festive tradition, where every custom, every dish served, and every toast offered carried a deliberate message aimed at the reluctant English nobility. Recognizing the deep cultural attachment Anglo-Saxons held for their Yule traditions, William made the strategic decision not to abolish them but to absorb and redefine them. The great Yule log still burned in hearths across the land, but now it did so under the watchful eyes of Norman guards in newly constructed castles. The traditional feasting continued, but the menu now featured both familiar English dishes and exotic Norman specialties, creating a culinary metaphor for the new Franco-English reality. This careful preservation of surface-level traditions created a crucial sense of continuity that helped mask the profound disruption of the conquest, allowing the English to feel their cultural identity was being respected even as their political world was being completely remade. The Christmas court of 1066 became William's most powerful stage for demonstrating his authority and wealth to skeptical Anglo-Saxon earls. He hosted magnificent feasts that lasted the full 12 days, overwhelming his English guests with displays of Norman abundance and sophistication. The quality of the wine, the richness of the spices, the skill of the imported Norman chefs, all served as edible propaganda proving the conqueror's cultural and material superiority. Yet William simultaneously showed respect for English customs by incorporating traditional Yule dishes and allowing English minstrels to perform alongside Norman troubadours. This delicate balance of demonstration and accommodation sent a clear message. Resistance was futile, but cooperation would be rewarded with continued honor and inclusion. Perhaps most strategically, William used the Christmas season to announce sweeping administrative changes that might have sparked rebellion if introduced at other times. During the festivities, when English nobles were enjoying his hospitality and warmed by his wine, William revealed his plans for the Domesday Survey, the comprehensive inventory of all English lands and resources. Presented amid the generosity of the Christmas court, this unprecedented exercise in royal control could be framed not as domination but as good governance, a natural extension of the king's responsibility to know and care for his realm. The timing transformed what was essentially an instrument of conquest into something that felt like prudent administration, making it more palatable to those who would be most affected by it. The physical setting of these Christmas celebrations reinforced William's political messages with powerful symbolism. Instead of holding court in traditional Anglo-Saxon locations, he hosted his festivities in rapidly constructed Norman castles, stone fortresses that physically demonstrated the new regime's permanence and military power. Within these imposing structures, the seating arrangements visually mapped the new political reality. Anglo-Saxon nobles found themselves placed below Norman lords in the hall's hierarchy, receiving this demotion while surrounded by Christmas decorations that recalled their own cultural traditions. This spatial politics allowed William to communicate hard truths about changed statuses within the comforting framework of familiar celebration, making the bitter pill of conquest easier to swallow. Even the religious aspects of Christmas served William's political purposes. His coronation had already been strategically scheduled for Christmas Day in 1066, intertwining his kingship with the celebration of Christ's birth. Subsequent Christmas masses emphasized prayers for the unity of the realm under its new ruler, with specially commissioned hymns that praised William's piety and generosity. The Church, under Norman-appointed bishops, became a willing partner in this festive governance, using the emotional resonance of the season to encourage acceptance of the new order as divinely sanctioned. This fusion of spiritual and temporal authority during the Christmas celebrations made resistance seem not just impractical but almost sacrilegious. The lasting success of William's strategy can be measured in how completely Norman Christmas traditions eventually became seen as simply English Christmas traditions. The roasted boar served at those first Norman Christmas feasts, once a foreign dish, became standard holiday fare. Norman-style gift-giving practices merged with Anglo-Saxon customs to create new hybrid traditions. Even the language of celebration gradually blended, with Norman French words entering the vocabulary of English festive culture. This cultural synthesis, begun as a political strategy, ultimately created a new English Christmas that bore the marks of both conqueror and conquered, demonstrating how effectively seasonal celebrations could serve as catalysts for broader cultural and political integration. While the Normans used Christmas to solidify a conquest, the Habsburg dynasty faced a far more complex challenge, governing a sprawling, fragmented empire that stretched from the Americas to Eastern Europe, encompassing dozens of distinct languages, cultures, and histories. Their ingenious solution was to transform the winter court ceremonies in Vienna into a spectacular engine of imperial unity, a carefully choreographed performance where every gesture, dish, and decoration served to bind their diverse nobility to the crown. The Habsburg Christmas wasn't merely a celebration. It was the central nervous system of imperial governance, a multi-sensory experience designed to make every visiting count from Bohemia, prince from Hungary, or archduke from the Netherlands feel simultaneously honored for their unique traditions and subsumed within a greater Habsburg whole. The guest list itself was a masterpiece of political calculation. Each year, invitations to the Vienna Winter Court were dispatched across the empire, their distribution mapping the precise political landscape of the moment. A noble from recently acquired Silesia might receive a particularly lavish invitation, signaling his new importance to the empire, while a frequently rebellious Hungarian magnate could find his seating placement subtly adjusted year by year, reflecting his changing standing. The act of traveling to Vienna in the depths of winter became a ritual of obedience in itself, a difficult journey that demonstrated commitment to the imperial center. Upon arrival, these regional elites found themselves immersed in an environment where Habsburg authority was omnipresent, from the imperial eagles emblazoned on decorations to the required use of German and Spanish in formal proceedings, yet where their own cultures were also given symbolic space. This delicate balance between imperial supremacy and regional recognition played out most vividly in the feasts. The banquet tables groaned with a conscious culinary tour of the empire. Rich goulash from Hungary sat alongside delicate pastries from Austria. Robust beers from Bohemia were served beside fine wines from Tyrol. This edible map communicated a powerful message. Every territory contributed something valuable to the whole, and the Habsburgs were the generous distributors of this imperial abundance. The order of toasts during these meals followed a strict protocol that mirrored the political hierarchy, with each regional representative drinking to the emperor's health in their own language before a unified response in German reinforced the central authority. These rituals transformed the simple act of dining into a performance of imperial unity. Perhaps the most brilliant aspect of Habsburg festive strategy was their creation of new traditions that had no regional precedents, thereby belonging exclusively to the imperial court. The elaborate Christmas Eve ceremony of the silver table, where the emperor himself would wait upon his officers, was a purely Habsburg invention. This ritual, publicized throughout the empire, presented the dynasty not as distant autocrats but as caring patriarchs serving their extended imperial family. Similarly, the precise choreography of gift-giving on New Year's Day, where nobles presented symbolic offerings from their regions and received lavish imperial gifts in return, created visible bonds of mutual obligation that transcended local loyalties. A Hungarian noble might arrive with fine paprika or Tokaji wine, but he departed with a jeweled cup bearing the Habsburg crest, a tangible reminder of where true power and generosity resided. The duration of these winter festivities, often stretching from Advent through Epiphany, allowed for this political reprogramming to occur through sheer immersion. Week after week of continuous ceremonies, religious services, hunts, and theatrical performances surrounded visitors with the symbols, sounds, and rhythms of Habsburg authority. By the time they began their winter journey back to their estates, they had been thoroughly incorporated into the imperial project, their regional identities not erased but neatly nested within a larger Habsburg identity. This festive diplomacy proved far more effective than military force in managing the empire's incredible diversity, turning the potentially fractious winter season into the glue that held the sprawling Habsburg domains together through centuries of dramatic change. Medieval rulers possessed an almost instinctive grasp of mass psychology, recognizing that the unique emotional landscape of winter created a perfect storm of receptivity to their political agendas. During the darkest, coldest months, human psychology undergoes subtle shifts. The scarcity of light affects mood, the harsh weather increases dependence on community, and the pervasive darkness heightens both fears and hopes. These seasonal vulnerabilities became powerful levers for authorities seeking to implement changes that might face resistance in brighter, more rational seasons. The very act of gathering for warmth and celebration created a collective emotional vulnerability that rulers could harness, turning biological responses to winter into political advantages. The heightened emotional states produced by winter celebrations created what we might call a collective opening for suggestion. When communities gathered in great halls illuminated against the darkness outside, their shared experience of light amid gloom generated a powerful bonding effect. This emotional synchrony made populations more receptive to narratives presented during festivities. A coronation announcement or new law introduced amid such heightened feelings gained emotional resonance that it would lack in ordinary circumstances. The contrast between the cold, dangerous world outside and the warm, abundant space of celebration created a psychological dependency on the provider of that comfort, naturally fostering loyalty to whoever supplied the feast, music, and protection during this vulnerable season. This emotional dynamic was particularly valuable during periods of transition or uncertainty. A new ruler coming to power in autumn could use the approaching winter festivals to build rapid rapport with their subjects through carefully staged generosity. The distribution of food, firewood, and festive cheer during the most difficult months created deep psychological bonds that mere fair weather governance could never achieve. The memory of a king who provided a magnificent Christmas feast during a particularly harsh winter would linger for years, creating a reservoir of goodwill that could be drawn upon during subsequent political challenges. This emotional banking allowed rulers to build political capital through seasonal generosity. The symbolism of light returning after darkness provided a perfect metaphorical framework for political renewal. Just as the solstice promised the sun's gradual return, a new ruler could position themselves as bringing hope and improvement after a period of difficulty. This narrative proved particularly effective following conflicts, successions, or economic challenges. The annual nature of this symbolism created a predictable opportunity for rulers to recalibrate their relationship with their subjects, using the new year as a natural reset point for political relationships. The very language of renewal and rebirth that surrounded winter celebrations could be easily adapted to frame political changes as natural, inevitable cycles rather than disruptive impositions. Communal participation in winter rituals created another psychological advantage, the experience of shared emotional release. The singing, dancing, feasting, and storytelling that characterized these festivals produced what anthropologists call communitas, a sense of unity that transcends ordinary social divisions. This temporary experience of boundlessness made populations more receptive to messages of unity and common purpose, allowing rulers to frame their governance as serving the collective good rather than particular interests. The memory of this shared emotional experience created lasting bonds, not just between individuals, but between the community and the authority that had facilitated this powerful moment of connection. The psychological impact extended to the very way time itself was perceived during these celebrations. The suspension of normal routines and the creation of a separate festive time frame allowed for what we might call temporal liminality, a period outside ordinary time where different rules applied. This altered state of consciousness made populations more open to changes that might seem jarring under normal circumstances. Announcements made during this period benefited from what felt like magical thinking, as if the special quality of festive time could smooth the implementation of new policies or power structures. The return to ordinary time after the celebrations then naturalized these changes as part of the renewed normal cycle. This sophisticated understanding of seasonal psychology represents one of the most subtle aspects of medieval political strategy. Rather than relying solely on force or legal authority, rulers learned to work with the natural emotional currents of the winter season, using celebrations not merely as entertainment but as powerful tools for shaping collective consciousness. The warmth of the feast hall, the joy of shared celebration, the hope symbolized by returning light, all became instruments of governance, turning the deepest human responses to winter into foundations of political stability and royal authority. Beyond the grand spectacles of feasts and performances, medieval rulers understood that the most enduring political messages often arrived not through proclamations, but through the familiar objects that filled daily life during winter celebrations. The very material culture of these festivals, the food served, the decorations hung, the gifts exchanged became a subtle yet powerful medium for communicating shifting allegiances and reinforcing new power structures. When a new dynasty came to power or religious authorities sought to consolidate control, they rarely began by tearing down old traditions. Instead, they mastered the art of gradual modification, introducing slight but significant changes to cherished seasonal items that signaled transformation while maintaining the comforting appearance of continuity. Consider the seemingly simple Yule log, a tradition with deep roots in Norse and Germanic winter celebrations. Originally, families selected a specific type of oak or ash log, carved it with runes, and sprinkled it with mead or oil as an offering to Thor or Odin. As Christian rulers gained influence, the type of wood gradually shifted toward fruit-bearing trees like cherry or apple, symbolizing new agricultural blessings rather than thunder gods. The accompanying rituals transformed too. Instead of offerings to pagan deities, the log might be sprinkled with holy water or accompanied by Christian prayers. These subtle material changes allowed communities to continue their beloved custom while gradually internalizing a new religious framework, making the transition from pagan to Christian authority feel like natural evolution rather than forced conversion. The culinary landscape of winter festivals provided another rich canvas for political messaging. Traditional recipes underwent careful modification to reflect new allegiances and power structures. In England after the Norman conquest, the Christmas feast began to feature both Anglo-Saxon dishes and Norman specialties, creating a culinary metaphor for the new Franco-English reality. A once purely English minced meat pie might now include French spices, while the roasting techniques for boar and venison blended native and Norman methods. These gastronomic innovations communicated a clear political message. Cooperation between conqueror and conquered could produce something new and desirable. The very act of sharing these hybrid foods during festive meals helped naturalize the political union through the intimate experience of taste and nourishment. Decorations and clothing offered particularly visible mediums for signaling political change. The colors and motifs used in festive decorations could be subtly adjusted to reflect new dynastic symbols or religious priorities. A Tudor rose might appear where a Plantagenet emblem once hung, or a Christian cross could be woven into previously pagan decorative patterns. Festive garments told their own stories of allegiance. Nobles might receive specially colored robes from their new ruler to wear during Christmas celebrations, visually demonstrating their integration into the current power structure. These sartorial choices transformed courtiers into walking advertisements for the regime, their bodies becoming living maps of political relationships during the very gatherings where those relationships were being negotiated and reinforced. Even the gifts exchanged during winter festivals carried layered political meanings beyond their surface value. The choice of presentation items, whether a ruler distributed silver cups bearing their crest, textiles featuring new heraldic symbols, or books containing approved religious texts, allowed them to implant their authority into the very homes of their subjects. These objects remained long after the festivities ended, serving as constant reminders of the giver's power and generosity. The act of displaying these gifts in one's home became a silent declaration of allegiance, while the daily use of a cup or plate bearing royal symbols naturally reinforced the donor's presence in the recipient's life. This material network of gifted objects created a physical infrastructure of loyalty that extended far beyond the festive season itself. The brilliance of this material approach to political communication lay in its accessibility and deniability. A peasant might not understand a Latin proclamation read in the town square, but they could comprehend the meaning of a new type of bread served at the Christmas feast or a different style of decoration in the church. These material changes spoke a language that crossed educational and social boundaries, reaching everyone from the highest noble to the lowest farmer. Simultaneously, their subtlety provided plausible deniability. Authorities could claim they were merely improving traditions rather than imposing new ideologies, allowing them to reshape cultural practices without triggering outright resistance. This strategy of material modification proved particularly effective because it worked on both conscious and unconscious levels. While some viewers might recognize the political symbolism in a changed decorative motif or a new festive food, many others would simply experience these modifications as natural evolutions of tradition. The comfort of familiar seasonal rhythms, the lighting of logs, the baking of special foods, the hanging of decorations allowed new meanings to enter cultural consciousness almost unnoticed, attached to practices that already carried deep emotional resonance. This gradual, material transformation of winter celebrations ultimately helped make political and religious changes feel inevitable rather than imposed, as if they had grown organically from within the culture itself rather than being forced upon it from outside. What began as a single night of bonfires and offerings to honor the winter solstice gradually stretched across the calendar, not by accident but through deliberate political engineering. The expansion of festival duration represented one of the most subtle yet effective tools in the medieval ruler's arsenal, transforming brief moments of celebration into extended periods of social control. Where ancient peoples might have marked the solstice with a day of rituals, Christian authorities systematically developed the concept of the 12 days of Christmas, creating a prolonged season that allowed for repeated reinforcement of new power structures. This wasn't merely a religious observance, it was a carefully calculated framework for governance, providing multiple opportunities to stage ceremonies, distribute gifts, and perform authority until these displays began to feel like natural tradition rather than political theater. The psychological impact of this extended celebration period cannot be overstated. A single day of feasting might create temporary goodwill, but 12 consecutive days of carefully choreographed events could fundamentally reshape how populations perceived and accepted authority. Each morning brought new rituals, special masses on specific saints' days, particular gift-giving traditions assigned to different dates, varied feasts and entertainments throughout the period. This repetitive exposure created what we might call ritual saturation, where the messages being communicated through celebration seeped into the collective consciousness through sheer repetition. The same noble who might resist a political demand presented in a council chamber would find himself complying with that same demand when it was embedded in the fifth day of Christmas festivities, surrounded by the accumulated goodwill of previous days' celebrations. Economically, the lengthened festival season created dependencies that bound entire communities to the ruling power. Artisans, musicians, food suppliers, and decorators could count on nearly 2 weeks of guaranteed employment, making them stakeholders in the continuation of both the celebrations and the regime that funded them. The financial injection during the lean winter months created a constituency with practical reasons to support the status quo, as their winter survival often depended on the patronage distributed during the extended festivities. This economic dimension transformed winter from a time of vulnerability into a period of opportunity, with the ruler positioned as the generous provider who turned the harsh season into one of abundance through the sheer scale of their festive investments. The expansion also allowed for more sophisticated political messaging through what we might call ritual progression. The 12 days could be structured to tell a story, beginning with the humble birth of Christ and gradually building toward the revelation of divine kingship on Epiphany. This narrative arc provided the perfect metaphorical framework for introducing new rulers or policies, allowing authorities to present changes as natural progressions rather than abrupt impositions. A monarch could use the early days of Christmas to emphasize themes of humility and service, then gradually introduce messages of authority and power as the season progressed, making the population more receptive to strengthened governance by the time the festivities concluded. Different regions developed their own variations on this extended celebration model, each tailored to specific political needs. In Mediterranean areas, the Christmas season often blended into pre-Lenten carnival periods that could extend winter festivities for months, creating even longer periods of controlled social management. Northern realms might emphasize the pre-Christmas Advent season alongside the 12 days, creating an even more prolonged period of anticipation and celebration. These variations demonstrate how local rulers adapted the basic principle of extended duration to address their particular political circumstances, using festival length as a flexible tool for maintaining control during the most challenging season of the year. The very predictability of these annual extended celebrations created a stabilizing rhythm that helped populations weather periods of political transition. During successions or dynastic changes, the familiar framework of the 12-day Christmas season provided continuity that masked underlying disruptions. People could continue celebrating St. Stephen's Day or Holy Innocents' Day according to custom, even as the ruler presiding over those celebrations might have changed dramatically. This temporal consistency created psychological security during uncertain times, allowing new authorities to establish themselves within a framework that felt traditional and stable regardless of recent political upheavals. Ultimately, the evolution of festival duration represents perhaps the most sophisticated application of temporal politics in the medieval world. By stretching winter celebrations across multiple days and weeks, rulers transformed time itself into a tool of governance, using the calendar to naturalize their authority through repetitive ritual performance. The extended season created economic interdependencies, psychological conditioning, and narrative opportunities that simply couldn't be compressed into a single day's observance. This strategic elongation of celebration turned the darkest period of the year into the brightest opportunity for reinforcing power, proving that sometimes the most effective political tools aren't weapons or laws, but simply the clever manipulation of time and tradition. Yet for all the sophisticated control mechanisms employed by rulers, winter festivals never became mere one-way streets of political communication. These celebrations, with their temporary suspension of normal hierarchies and licensed irreverence, created unexpected openings for ordinary people to push back, mock, and subtly challenge authority from below. The very spaces designed for top-down control often became stages for bottom-up resistance, where the powerless could briefly wield symbolic power through the sanctioned mischief of the season. Consider the complex role of the Lord of Misrule, that colorful figure appointed to preside over Christmas revelries. While authorities intended this temporary ruler to highlight the absurdity of inverted hierarchy, commoners often seized the opportunity to make pointed political commentary through their mock monarch. The Lord's proclamations, though framed as foolishness, could contain sharp satire about unfair taxes, corrupt officials, or unpopular policies. A carefully worded, foolish decree might mock a noble's gambling debts or a bishop's hypocrisy, delivering truths that would be dangerous to speak directly. This licensed mockery created a safety valve that actually allowed grievances to be aired, however indirectly, preventing total suppression of dissent while maintaining the overall festive framework. The preservation of banned pagan practices within Christian celebrations represents another form of subtle resistance. In rural areas particularly, communities found clever ways to maintain ancient traditions under new religious labels. The baking of Yule breads continued, but with crosses etched into the crust instead of pagan symbols. Wells were still decorated with greenery at solstice time, but now with quick prayers to Christian saints rather than older spirits. These hybrid practices allowed people to maintain cultural continuity with their ancestors while technically complying with new religious requirements. The very persistence of these semi-Christianized traditions demonstrated the limits of either ecclesiastical or royal authority to completely reshape popular culture according to their designs. Satirical performances and folk plays became particularly potent vehicles for disguised criticism. While official court entertainments reinforced approved narratives, village productions often included stock characters that mocked local authorities: the greedy tax collector, the lecherous priest, the foolish nobleman. These portrayals, embedded within familiar comic frameworks, allowed communities to laugh at their superiors without facing outright rebellion charges. The protective coloring of festive entertainment gave cover for social criticism, creating a tradition of political satire that would eventually evolve into more overt forms of dissent. A peasant might never dare criticize his lord to his face, but he could laugh uproariously when a player in a Christmas pageant did exactly that. Even the seemingly innocent tradition of wassailing, going door to door singing for food and drink, contained elements of social negotiation. Groups of lower status villagers would visit the homes of the wealthy, performing traditional songs that often contained not-so-subtle reminders of feudal obligations. The lyrics might mention the Lord's duty to provide for his people or make joking references to recent hardships. The festive context transformed what could have been begging into a ritualized exchange that reinforced mutual obligations while allowing the poor to symbolically claim their due from the rich. Refusing wassailers was considered bad luck, giving the performers a surprising amount of leverage during their temporary inversion of normal hospitality rules. Food itself became a medium for quiet resistance through the preservation of banned festive dishes. When ecclesiastical authorities attempted to eliminate certain traditional foods associated with pagan practices, communities often found ways to continue preparing them with slight modifications. A cake once shaped like a solar wheel might be renamed Christmas cake and decorated with Christian symbols while maintaining its circular form. The consumption of these adapted foods became acts of cultural preservation, ways of maintaining identity and continuity despite pressure to conform to new norms. At the communal feast table, these culinary survivals served as edible reminders that popular culture had its own resilience against top-down control. The timing and duration of celebrations also became sites of negotiation between official and popular practice. While authorities might decree certain days as proper for celebration, communities often extended festivities according to their own traditions and needs. A village might continue its revelries beyond the officially sanctioned 12 days of Christmas, or begin celebrations earlier than church authorities preferred. These temporal expansions represented subtle assertions of autonomy, ways of claiming space for popular culture within the framework of approved observance. The very persistence of these dating variations demonstrated that complete control of the calendar remained elusive despite rulers' best efforts. This constant negotiation between official control and popular interpretation made winter festivals far more complex than simple tools of domination. They became living conversations between rulers and ruled, where authority was both performed and questioned, reinforced and subtly challenged. The gifts given by monarchs created obligations, but the satirical songs sung about them in return adjusted the terms of those obligations. The approved religious ceremonies provided structure, but the persistence of older traditions within them maintained cultural continuity with the past. This dynamic tension ultimately made winter celebrations more resilient and enduring than they would have been as purely top-down affairs, allowing them to absorb social changes while maintaining their core function as moments of community cohesion and cultural expression during the darkest days of the year. While Western European rulers often used winter festivals to mask or legitimize power transitions, the Byzantine Empire developed a far more integrated approach where imperial authority and religious observance became virtually indistinguishable within their winter celebrations. In Constantinople, the celebration of Christ's birth wasn't merely an opportunity for political theater. It was the ultimate demonstration of the emperor's unique role as both temporal ruler and Christ's representative on earth. The Byzantine approach reflected their distinct political theology, where the emperor served as the living bridge between divine and human realms, a concept that transformed their winter festivals into sophisticated performances of this sacred relationship. The Byzantine winter celebrations reached their magnificent apex during the reign of Emperor Justinian in the 6th century, where the Christmas liturgy in the Hagia Sophia became perhaps the most elaborate political religious spectacle of the medieval world. The physical space itself communicated imperial theology. The massive dome representing heaven, the emperor's throne positioned at the symbolic center of the cosmos, and the intricate mosaics depicting Christ Pantocrator simultaneously blessing both the congregation and the imperial family. When the emperor processed into the church on Christmas morning, he didn't merely enter a building. He enacted a cosmic drama where earthly power mirrored heavenly order. The incense, the chant of the choir, the glitter of countless candles on gold mosaics, all worked together to create an overwhelming sensory experience that naturalized imperial authority as part of the divine plan itself. What particularly distinguished Byzantine practice was their sophisticated use of theological justification for political arrangements. Western rulers might claim divine right, but Byzantine emperors embedded their authority within the very structure of Christmas theology. The concept of the incarnation God becoming human in Christ provided the perfect metaphor for the emperor's role as God's representative on earth. Christmas sermons often explicitly drew parallels between Christ's humble birth in a manger and the emperor's supposed humility despite his absolute power, creating a theological framework that made challenge to imperial authority seem like challenge to divine order itself. This intellectual grounding gave Byzantine winter celebrations a philosophical depth that went beyond Western Europe's more pragmatic uses of festival politics. The Byzantine liturgical calendar itself became a tool of imperial governance to an extent unseen in the West, where Western rulers might schedule coronations or important announcements to coincide with Christmas. Byzantine emperors structured entire winter seasons around intricate ceremonial cycles that reinforced their authority. The period from Christmas through Epiphany became a continuous performance of imperial power, with each day featuring specific rituals that highlighted different aspects of the emperor's sacred role. The Feast of the Nativity on December 25th emphasized his humility and piety, while the following days gradually built toward Theophany on January 6th, which celebrated his role as defender of orthodoxy and unity of the empire. This ceremonial intensity reflected the Byzantine Empire's particular political challenges. Rulers in Constantinople faced constant threats from both external enemies and internal factionalism, making the maintenance of imperial prestige crucial for stability. The winter festivals provided regular opportunities to demonstrate the regime's strength and divine favor to both domestic audiences and foreign diplomats. The distribution of specially minted Christmas coins, the hosting of elaborate receptions for foreign ambassadors, and the very spectacle of the imperial court in its winter splendor all served to project an image of invincible authority that often belied the empire's actual vulnerabilities. In a realm where perception often shaped reality more than military strength, these winter performances became essential tools of statecraft. The Byzantine approach also differed in its direct connection between liturgical practice and imperial ceremony. While Western monarchs attended Christmas Mass as honored worshippers, Byzantine emperors participated as active liturgical figures, sometimes even entering the sanctuary to make offerings alongside clergy. This blurring of boundaries between religious and imperial roles would have been unthinkable in the West, where church and state maintained more separation. The Byzantine model created a sacral kingship so complete that the emperor's political authority derived not just from God's approval, but from his actual participation in divine mysteries through the Christmas liturgy. This comparative analysis reveals how political context shaped festive practices. The Byzantine Empire's continuous existence from Roman times, its relative stability compared to Western Europe's fragmented kingdoms, and its deeply integrated church-state structure all contributed to developing winter celebrations that emphasized theological justification and ceremonial complexity over the more pragmatic power-masking strategies seen in the West. Where Frankish or English rulers used Christmas to legitimize recently acquired power, Byzantine emperors used it to reinforce authority that claimed unbroken descent from Augustus and direct commission from Christ himself. Both approaches ultimately served similar purposes of consolidating power, but they emerged from profoundly different political and theological environments, demonstrating how the same winter festivals could be adapted to serve vastly different governing strategies across the medieval world. Those medieval power plays didn't just fade into history, they shaped the very winter celebrations we know today in ways most of us never realize. When we exchange gifts on Christmas morning, we're participating in a tradition that rulers perfected to create political obligations. That carefully selected present for a loved one echoes the calculated generosity of medieval monarchs who used gift-giving to secure noble loyalty and reinforce social hierarchies. Even our stress over finding the perfect gift carries whispers of those ancient political calculations, transformed now into personal expressions of care rather than tools of governance, yet still rooted in the same fundamental human language of reciprocity and relationship. The timing of our modern holidays still follows those medieval strategic alignments. Christmas landing on December 25th wasn't arbitrary. It was a brilliant political maneuver to overlay Christian observance onto existing pagan celebrations. Today, we accept this date without question. Our winter festivities compressed between consumer-driven Black Friday and the fresh starts of New Year's resolutions, yet still following patterns established centuries ago to maximize political impact during the darkest days of the year. The very fact that we stretch celebrations across an entire season, rather than a single day, reflects medieval rulers' understanding that extended festivities created more opportunities for political messaging and social control. Look at the Christmas feast on your table, the centerpiece ham or turkey, the special desserts, the abundance that feels so different from everyday meals. This tradition of holiday overindulgence originated in medieval displays of royal wealth and generosity, where rulers used feasts to demonstrate their power to provide during the scarcest season. Today, we've democratized this abundance, but the underlying message remains. Winter celebrations are times to demonstrate our capacity to care for others through food, to show our prosperity through hospitality, and to strengthen social bonds through shared meals. The political theater of the medieval Great Hall has transformed into the family dinner table, but the essential human impulses remain remarkably consistent. Even our holiday decorations carry echoes of those ancient power strategies. The Christmas tree, now a universal symbol of the season, began as a Germanic tradition that Christian authorities gradually reinterpreted to fit new theological frameworks. The lights we string everywhere recall both the pagan bonfires that celebrated the sun's return and the medieval candles that symbolized Christ as light of the world. When we deck our halls with greenery during the darkest days of winter, we're participating in a tradition that rulers once used to demonstrate their ability to maintain life and beauty even in harsh conditions, a powerful metaphor for effective governance that now serves as simple seasonal cheer. The pressure to achieve holiday perfection, the perfect gifts, the perfect meal, the perfect family gathering might feel like a modern invention of consumer culture, but it actually has deeper roots in medieval political theater. Rulers understood that magnificent celebrations created powerful impressions that could cover underlying tensions or recent power shifts. Today, we've internalized this performance pressure, striving to create perfect holiday moments that demonstrate our success and stability, much like medieval monarchs used winter festivals to project an image of unchallengeable authority. The anxiety we feel about holiday expectations is in some ways the modern equivalent of the pressure medieval rulers felt to stage impressive celebrations that would secure their power. Perhaps most fascinating is how these politically charged traditions have been repurposed for modern life while retaining their essential structures. The office Christmas party, with its careful seating arrangements and ritualized gift exchanges, recreates the hierarchical dynamics of medieval court festivities. The neighborhood cookie exchange performs the same function as medieval gift-giving networks, creating and maintaining social bonds through calculated generosity. Even the tradition of charitable giving during the holidays continues the medieval practice of using winter generosity to demonstrate moral authority and social leadership, though now divorced from its original political context and focused on different forms of status and influence. This historical awareness doesn't diminish our modern celebrations but rather enriches them, adding layers of meaning to traditions we might otherwise take for granted. When we understand that our holiday customs emerged from complex negotiations between rulers and populations, between religious authorities and cultural practices, we see winter festivals not as fixed traditions but as living conversations that have evolved across centuries. The Christmas tree in your living room isn't just a tree, it's the product of cultural adaptation, religious strategy, and political calculation that stretches back through generations. The gifts under it represent both personal relationships and ancient practices of creating obligation through generosity. The midwinter festivals we inherit from medieval times represent far more than simple cultural traditions. They were sophisticated political tools that helped societies navigate dramatic power shifts with minimal disruption. From Saturnalia's transformation into Christmas to the elaborate court extravaganzas of monarchs across Europe, rulers mastered the art of using seasonal celebrations to mask, legitimize, and naturalize seismic changes in authority. Through strategic ritual, deliberate economic manipulation, and profound psychological engagement, these winter festivities became the perfect smokescreen for transferring power while maintaining social stability. This fascinating history reveals a recurring pattern where cultural practices often carry hidden political dimensions that shape our world in ways we rarely recognize. The Christmas gifts we exchange today originated as calculated demonstrations of royal generosity designed to create obligations. The festive feasts that bring families together began as edible propaganda showcasing a ruler's wealth and organizational capacity. Even the timing of our celebrations, stretched across weeks rather than concentrated on a single day, reflects medieval strategies for maximizing political messaging during periods of heightened emotional receptivity. As we participate in modern winter celebrations, we're engaging with centuries of political strategy encoded as festive tradition. The lights on our trees, the songs we sing, the special foods we prepare, all carry echoes of power negotiations between rulers and populations across generations. This awareness doesn't diminish our holiday joy but rather enriches it, adding layers of meaning to customs we might otherwise take for granted. We become part of an ongoing conversation about how societies manage change, how authority establishes itself, and how cultural practices evolve to serve multiple purposes beyond their surface appearance. The true genius of these medieval strategies lies in their enduring effectiveness. Today's holiday office parties, with their careful seating arrangements and ritualized gift exchanges, unconsciously recreate the hierarchical dynamics of medieval court festivities. Our neighborhood cookie swaps perform the same function as ancient gift-giving networks, creating and maintaining social bonds through calculated generosity. Even our tradition of charitable giving during the holidays continues the medieval practice of using winter generosity to demonstrate moral authority and social leadership, though now focused on different forms of status and influence. This historical perspective offers us a powerful lens through which to examine our own contemporary celebrations. It encourages us to look beyond the surface of our traditions to understand the deeper social and political functions they may still be serving. In an age of rapid cultural change and shifting power dynamics, the medieval approach to managing transitions through celebration reminds us that the most effective changes often occur not through force but through gradual adaptation. By working with existing cultural patterns rather than against them, and by understanding the profound psychological power of shared ritual and celebration during times of darkness and uncertainty. If this journey through the hidden political layers of our favorite winter traditions has captivated your curiosity, showing you just how much power and pageantry are baked into the holidays, then you won't want to miss what comes next on this channel. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it. It truly helps us continue creating content that pulls back the curtain on history's most fascinating untold stories. Subscribe and join our community of curious minds. There are so many more secrets waiting to be uncovered, from the symbolic origins of everyday objects to the quiet rebellions hidden in classic literature. I'd love to hear which revelation surprised you the most. Was it the strategic retelling of Saturnalia, the calculated gift-giving of medieval courts, or the psychological subtlety of inverting social roles during Twelfth Night? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's get a conversation going about how these historical strategies might still echo in the celebrations we know today. Have you noticed modern traditions that feel like they're shaping loyalties or reinforcing certain values? Your perspective adds so much to this shared exploration of history's deeper layers. By hitting that notification bell, you'll be the first to know when we release new videos that challenge conventional narratives and offer fresh perspectives on the past. Every click of engagement, whether a like, share, comment, or subscription, directly supports this channel and allows us to dive even deeper into the stories that shape our world. Thank you for watching, for wondering, and for helping keep the spirit of inquisitive discovery